The sun was barely rising over the village of Odu, casting golden light over the narrow, bustling market lanes. Ngozi, a simple woman of humble beginnings, walked through the village square, her heart heavy with the secrets she carried. From the age of 12, she had known she was different. The whispers, the voices, the shadows that danced just beyond her vision. She saw the dead. No one knew this, of course. She had kept it hidden, fearing the consequences of revealing such an unusual gift. But today, something felt different. It was on one of those quiet mornings, as she sat in the market, watching the women haggle over yams and tomatoes, that it happened. She looked up and saw a face she recognized from the stories her grandmother had told her. It was the face of a man who had died years ago in a fire. His eyes locked with hers, and he spoke in a voice only she could hear. "Help me, Nozi. My children need me." His voice was like a distant echo, filled with sorrow. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, but when the man's image began to blur and fade, she realized it was no dream. The dead were speaking to her. Ngozi didn't know what to do, but the man's request haunted her as she went about her day, gathering the small necessities from the market. She overheard the whispers of the spirits once again as they shared their tales of untold grief and unfinished business. As the sun dipped low in the sky, she found herself standing before a dilapidated hut. There she saw the same man, standing beside his children. The tears in their eyes told a story that words could not capture. She knelt beside the children and whispered, "Your father is here, waiting to speak to you." The spirit's message was clear. The family needed closure. The dead man wanted his children to know he had died with regret, but loved them still. With a trembling hand, Ngozi guided the children in a prayer for their father, and as they did, she felt the heaviness lift from the air. The moment the prayer ended, the man smiled, his form fading slowly into the air. The spirits around her seemed to quiet, as though the market itself exhaled a sigh of relief. Ngozi walked away, her heart pounding, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She had helped the dead find peace. But little did she know, that was only the beginning. The next morning, as Ngozi walked through the village, she felt the presence of 1,000 unseen eyes. The spirits were watching her, waiting. She couldn't escape their gaze, not even in the busy marketplace, where the chatter of vendors and customers usually drowned out all thoughts. But now, their voices were louder. A cacophony of desperate pleas for help echoed in her mind. Her gift wasn't just a blessing, it was a burden. The spirits, they had begun to seek her out more often, pressing her with their needs and unfinished business. Some came quietly, others with urgency, their stories unfolding in her mind like the pages of a forgotten book. Ngozi was in the middle of a simple task, purchasing cassava for her family, when a figure approached her. It was a woman, dressed entirely in white, her face obscured by a veil. The air around her was cold, even though the sun blazed overhead. The woman stood silently, her eyes locked on Ngozi, and without saying a word, she reached out and touched her arm. A sudden chill ran through Ngozi's body as the woman's voice entered her mind. "I need to go home, but I cannot find the way." The spirits were becoming more direct, more persistent. This woman, unlike the others, seemed confused, lost in her own death. Ngozi knew she had to help her, but where would she begin? The woman's story was a mystery, one that Ngozi had no answers for. and yet she felt the pull of her unfinished journey. That night, Ngozi sat by the fire, her mind racing. The woman in white hadn't said much, but there was an overwhelming sense of sadness that clung to her like a shadow. Who was she? What had happened to her? The more Ngozi tried to ignore the voices, the stronger they became. Her mind buzzed with the restless spirits, all with their own unfinished business. But it was the woman's quiet plea that weighed the heaviest on her heart. The next morning, Ngozi made her way to the local elders, seeking guidance. They spoke of an old tragedy, a woman who had died in childbirth. Many years ago, her child, taken by the river. The village had never fully healed from that loss, and neither had the spirit of the woman. She had wandered the earth for years, seeking the child she could never find. With this new knowledge, Ngozi returned to the river, where she knew the woman's soul had become tethered. As she stood by the water, she called out to the woman in white, "Come, find peace. Your child is waiting for you." The water stirred, and the woman appeared once again. Slowly, she stepped into the river, her body dissolving into mist as she reunited with the child she had lost. Ngozi watched in silence, her heart full of sorrow and joy. The spirits no longer whispered in her ears, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her gift lift. As weeks passed, Ngozi found herself caught between two worlds. The marketplace was no longer just a place of commerce for her. It had become a threshold between life and death. The spirits' whispers followed her everywhere, and no matter how much she tried to ignore them, they kept growing louder. She couldn't turn away. She couldn't escape. There was always someone in need, someone waiting to be heard. One evening, as the sun began to set, she overheard a conversation between two spirits. One was a man, another, a young woman. They spoke of betrayal and unspoken love, and though their words were soft, they were filled with anger. The man's voice echoed in Ngozi's mind, his tone bitter. "She betrayed me. She loved another." The woman's voice was filled with sorrow. "I never wanted to hurt you, but you never saw me." Their argument was like an endless loop, a reflection of their unresolved emotions. Ngozi approached the spirits cautiously, sensing the deep pain between them. The man and the woman had died in a tragic misunderstanding, and their souls were now locked in a cycle of anger and regret. Neither could move on, unable to forgive the other for the pain they had caused. Ngozi spoke gently, her voice breaking through the bitterness. "You both are trapped by your grief, but forgiveness is the key." She knew it wasn't easy, but it was the only way. The spirits looked at each other, their anger still evident, but there was a flicker of understanding in their eyes. They both knelt by the fire, their hands trembling as they reached out to each other. Slowly, they spoke words of forgiveness, healing the wounds they had carried for so long. As they did, the air around them grew lighter, and their forms began to dissolve. With their reconciliation, the spirits were free. They had found peace, at last. Ngozi watched them fade into the ether, feeling a profound sense of relief. She had done it again, helped them find their way, but as their forms disappeared, she felt the weight of the marketplace pressed down on her once more. More souls were waiting, more stories to be told. The days blurred together as Ngozi continued her work in the marketplace. She had helped many spirits, offering them guidance and peace, but it was becoming harder to keep up with the constant flood of voices. One evening, as she was preparing to leave the market, she felt an overwhelming presence. It was different from the others. It felt like a shadow, cold and unnerving. She turned to find a man standing in the distance, his eyes hollow with despair. His clothes were tattered, and his face was twisted in agony. "I have no rest, no peace," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "My name is Ikenna. I was wronged, and I cannot move on until justice is done." Ngozi approached him cautiously, the weight of his sorrow pressing heavily on her chest. She listened as Ikenna told her his story. He had been a merchant in life, living a simple life with his family. But one day, he had been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit. Betrayed by his closest friend, Ikenna was cast out of the village, and his name was dragged through the mud. In his final days, he had died in a foreign town, never having been exonerated, never having cleared his name. "I cannot rest," he said, "until the truth is known, and my name is restored." Ngozi knew what she had to do. She began her search for Ikenna's past, seeking out those who had known him in life. She visited the village where he had once lived, now a quiet and forgotten place. She spoke to the elders, and after many long hours, she uncovered the truth. Ikenna had been falsely accused, and the true criminal had long since fled the village, leaving behind a legacy of lies. It was then that Ngozi realized what had to be done. She needed to clear Ikenna's name and give him the justice he had never received. But this would not be easy. The villagers had long since moved on, and many of them had forgotten the details of the crime. The journey would be difficult, but Ngozi knew it was the only way. With the truth in her hands, Ngozi returned to the marketplace, where Ikenna's spirit awaited her. She spoke to the gathered crowd, telling them the story of Ikenna's life and the injustice he had suffered. Slowly, the people of the village began to listen, some with regret in their eyes, others with anger. At last, one of the elders stood up. "We were wrong," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. "Ikenna was innocent. We have lived with the shame of our mistake for far too long." As the crowd murmured in agreement, Ikenna's spirit appeared, a smile finally breaking through his sorrowful face. "Thank you," he whispered to Ngozi. "I can rest now." With those words, his form dissolved, his soul finally at peace. Ngozi had helped many spirits find peace, but now there was something different. People in the village had begun to whisper about her abilities. Some were grateful, having heard of the good she had done, while others were fearful, unsure of what it meant to have someone with such gifts living among them. She had become both a healer and an outcast, revered yet distanced by those who did not fully understand her powers. One afternoon, as she was preparing her evening meal, she heard a knock on her door. She opened it to find a woman standing there, her face filled with desperation. "I need your help," the woman said urgently. "My husband has been missing for weeks, and I fear he's dead." The woman's name was Ada, and her husband had disappeared while traveling to a nearby town. The authorities had assumed he had simply left, but Ada knew deep in her heart that something was wrong. She had been hearing whispers in her dreams, whispers of a man trapped between the living and the dead. Ngozi agreed to help, and together they traveled to the town where Ada's husband had last been seen. As they walked through the narrow streets, Ngozi felt a familiar chill in the air, The spirits were restless here, and one in particular called out to her. "It's him," Ngozi whispered. "He's here." They arrived at an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. Inside, Ngozi found the spirit of a man trapped between two worlds. Eda's husband, Chijioke, had been caught in a terrible accident. His body left behind, but his soul unable to move on. He had died, but his spirit was trapped, wandering in confusion and pain. As Ada stepped forward, her voice trembling, she called out to him, "Chijioke, I've come for you. It's time to let go." With a final, heart-wrenching cry, the spirit of Chijioke reached out to Ada, and the two of them embraced. Ada wept as her husband's soul found peace. Slowly, his form began to fade, and with it, the heaviness that had clung to Ada's heart. Ngozi watched as the spirit disappeared, knowing that another soul had found its way home. Though Ngozi had helped Ada, she felt the weight of her own gift growing heavier. She could feel the toll it was taking on her, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Each spirit she helped took something from her, and she knew that one day the price would be too great. But for now, she could not turn away. The dead needed her, and she would not abandon them. As the days passed, the market became quieter. The whispers of the spirits no longer felt like a call for help, but rather a dark presence that surrounded Ngozi. It was as if something was watching her, something darker than the spirits she had helped. One evening, as she was walking home, she felt a cold gust of wind and heard a voice she had never heard before. "You will regret what you've done," the voice whispered, low and menacing. Ngozi froze, her heart racing. She turned to see nothing but the shadows of the night, but the feeling of being watched remained. It was as if the very air around her had changed, and she was no longer alone. That night, Ngozi lay awake in her bed, unable to sleep. The voice from the shadows kept replaying in her mind. "You will regret what you've done." The words were like a curse, haunting her thoughts. She had helped so many spirits, but now it seemed there was something, or someone, who was angry with her. The following day, Ngozi was visited by a new spirit, one that filled her with dread. It was a man, his eyes glowing with fury. "You helped them," he hissed, "but you never helped me. Now you will pay for your interference." Ngozi felt her heart sink. The spirit before her was not a lost soul seeking peace. It was one consumed by anger and vengeance. This was a spirit she couldn't simply guide to rest. The spirit began to grow stronger, its power feeding on the fear it instilled in her. It seemed as if every spirit she had helped had turned against her. The voices grew louder, the shadows darker. She couldn't fight the darkness that was closing in on her, but she knew she couldn't give up. If she did, the spirits would never find peace, and she would never be free. With a trembling voice, she called out to the spirits she had helped. "I need you," she whispered. "Help me fight this darkness." Suddenly, the spirits of those she had helped appeared before her, their forms glowing with a soft, peaceful light. The vengeful spirit faltered, its power weakening as the others surrounded it. Together, they pushed the darkness away, their light shining brighter than ever. With one final scream, the vengeful spirit vanished, and the marketplace fell silent. The voices of the dead were no longer hostile but calm, their whispers a gentle reminder that peace had been restored. Ngozi breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew that her journey was far from over. Days turned into weeks, and Ngozi's connection to the spirits began to grow even stronger. The villagers had started to look to her as both a healer and a guide. Her ability to communicate with the dead, now a known and accepted part of village life. But the growing reverence she received came with its own complications. More souls came to her for help, more restless spirits seeking closure, peace, or redemption. One day, as Ngozi walked through the market, she felt a new presence, a sense of urgency in the air. A spirit approached her, a familiar one. It was the woman in white who had first appeared to Ngozi, seeking her lost child. But this time, the woman's face was different. It was no longer filled with sorrow, but with a deep, aching gratitude. She smiled faintly at Ngozi. "You have helped so many, Ngozi," she said softly, her voice both calm and sorrowful. "But now you stand at a crossroads. There are greater challenges ahead, and you will have to choose. Which path will you take?" Ngozi felt a shiver run down her spine. What did the woman mean? Peace had always been her goal, to help the souls of the departed find peace. Yet, the growing number of spirits, the sense of being pulled in so many directions, was beginning to weigh heavily on her. She had lost her sense of herself, overwhelmed by the needs of others. "I don't understand," Ngozi said, her voice tinged with confusion. "What are you asking of me?" The woman's eyes softened. "You have the power to call the spirits, to ease their suffering. But there are forces greater than you, dark forces, unseen and unpredictable. If you continue on this path, you will be forever bound to the spirits. You must decide whether you will remain their servant, or if you will gain the strength to control them. To do that, you must make a choice. Will you seek the power to command them, or will you keep your heart pure, as you have always done?" Ngozi's heart pounded in her chest. She had always helped the spirits, because it was her calling, her gift. But to have the option of controlling them, of holding power over life and death, felt dangerous and overwhelming. Yet, the thought of ending this work, of leaving the spirits to wander in agony, felt just as wrong. In the midst of her inner turmoil, Ngozi was approached by a familiar face, a friend named Ifeoma, who had been with her through many of her hardest moments. Ifeoma, who had long suspected the truth about Ngozi's gift, had always offered support when the weight of the world became too much for Ngozi to carry alone. "Ngozi," Ifeoma said, her voice filled with concern. "You've been helping these souls for so long. I can see how it's taking a toll on you. You can't keep carrying this burden alone." Ngozi looked at her friend, her heart aching. "But Ifeoma, they need me. I can't just abandon them." "I know," Ifeoma said gently, "but you also need to think about yourself. You've already sacrificed so much. It's okay to take a step back. You can't help others if you're lost to yourself." Ngozi swallowed hard, the weight of her friend's words settling into her heart. Could she really let go? Could she stop helping the spirits, stop listening to their pleas, and save herself? The choice between peace and power seemed so distant now, clouded by the thought of losing herself in the process. That night, after Ifeoma left, Ngozi sat by the river, the moonlight casting long shadows over the water. The woman in white appeared once again, this time standing in the water, her form shimmering like a ghostly reflection. "You must choose, Ngozi," the woman whispered. "The crossroads are here. Which will you be? A servant of the spirits, or their master?" Ngozi looked into the water, her reflection staring back at her. She could see the pain in her own eyes, the exhaustion, the uncertainty. The spirits needed her. She could feel it. But in this moment, she realized that helping them didn't mean losing herself. "I will continue helping them," she said firmly, her voice steady. "But I will not let their voices control me. I will help them find peace, but I will also find peace for myself." The woman in white nodded, her form beginning to fade. "You have chosen wisely, Ngozi. May the spirits guide you, but may you always be true to yourself." As the woman disappeared, Ngozi felt a sense of calm wash over her. The burden lightened. She had found her answer. Now she could help the dead without sacrificing her own soul in the process. With her decision made, Ngozi returned to the village with a new sense of clarity. The spirits still came to her, but now she knew how to set boundaries. She helped them, yes, but she no longer let their sorrow consume her. She began teaching the villagers how to honor their ancestors, how to remember the dead with reverence, but not to live in fear of them. Her gift was a blessing, but it did not define her. One day, as she walked through the market, a child tugged at her sleeve, holding a small flower in her hand. "Do you remember my grandmother, Ngozi?" the child asked, innocently. "She told me to give you this flower, to thank you." Ngozi smiled softly, touched by the gesture. It was a reminder that her work had made a difference, not just for the dead, but for the living too. Her gift had brought peace to many, and now it was time for her to embrace her own peace. Late one evening, Ngozi returned to the river where she had made her decision. There she saw the woman in white once again, waiting by the water's edge. "You have done well, Ngozi," the woman said, her voice soft and soothing. "Your journey is not over, but you have found the balance you sought. You have shown great wisdom in understanding that peace is not only for the dead, but for the living as well." Ngozi nodded, the weight of the world no longer pressing down on her shoulders. The spirits, now content with their peace, had finally let her go. Ngozi continued her work, but now with a heart full of joy rather than sorrow. She had found her place in the world, bridging the gap between the living and the dead, without allowing either to overtake her life. She helped the spirits, listened to their stories, and gave them closure. But she never lost herself in the process. As the seasons changed, so did Ngozi. She became a teacher, a guide, a friend to the villagers, teaching them how to honor their ancestors and live in harmony with the world around them. She found peace not just for the dead, but for herself as well. And with each passing day, her gift grew stronger, her heart lighter. Years later, when Ngozi grew old, she sat by the river once more, watching the setting sun paint the sky in shades of gold. She had given her life to helping the spirits, and in return, they had given her peace. The market, once filled with the voices of the dead, was now a place of joy and celebration. The people no longer feared the spirits, but honored them as part of their history. Ngozi smiled softly, knowing her work had been done. The spirits had found their peace, and so had she. And as she closed her eyes for the final time, the voices of the dead, once restless and lost, whispered their thanks, fading into the eternal silence.